In this movie, you learn to UV unwrap the garage model. In general, when you plan to unwrap a model, you have two basic main approaches. You either unwrap a 3D model to fit an existing bitmap, or you unwrap a model first, save the UV coordinates layout, and export it to a Paint application so you can create a new bitmap. Both ways are fine, and which one you choose depends largely on your project. Here, you'll use both methods. You'll unwrap the building and the car to fit an existing bitmap, and you will later unwrap the dyno head with the purpose of creating a special bitmap for it. For now, you'll concentrate on the building. The provided bitmap that you will use for the building is a collage of a dozen or more images. I went out one day and took snapshots of every old and decrepit building, fence, pillar, or wall that I could find. Ironically, dirty textures usually make a 3D scene look more realistic. Once I had a good collection of pictures, I picked a few that I manipulated in Photoshop. I cropped, adjusted, and laid out facades in one square 1024 by 1024 bitmap image. And this is the image that you will use for this particular model. In fact, this model was built by using some of the textures as reference to ensure a good fit. Maximize the perspective view, Alt-W on the keyboard, to get a better view of the scene. Select the building and press F4 to enable Etched Faces mode and see the mesh structure. You can even isolate the selection to concentrate on the building alone. Open the Slate Material Editor. A material named Garage is already applied to the model, but the bitmap is not yet defined as a diffuse map. Simply connect the bitmap node to the diffuse channel and exit the material editor. The model's color changes slightly, but you still cannot see the bitmap properly. That's because the UV coordinates are yet to be defined. Even though the model is simple, it will be quite difficult to achieve a good result with the conventional UVW map modifier. Instead, go ahead and apply the Unwrap UVW modifier. Now the bitmap starts to show, but it's all over the place, with bad streaking happening along the walls. So, how do you unwrap a model such as this? It would be very hard to work on the model as a whole. It's much easier to separate it into different pieces. However, that doesn't mean you need to break the mesh. It simply means that you separate the model at the mapping level. For example, you will start with the wall on the left. The idea is to select the faces that make that left wall and map them to fit the stone wall in the image. Click the Polygon Selection tool and adjust your view to get a better look of the left wall. Next, you need to select all the polygons that make out that wall. You can use conventional methods, the safest being the use of the Control key to add to the selection. You can also use window or crossing methods as long as you make sure you didn't select any polygons in the background. To make things easier, Ignore Backfacing is enabled by default to prevent backfaces from being selected. However, be aware that it's not always 100% reliable. Another method is to select the center polygon and then use the Grow feature, and then fine-tune the selection with the Control or Alt keys. A good safeguard mechanism is to switch to Wireframe View, F3 toggle, to verify that your selection is accurate. The F2 toggle lets you see the selection in shaded red. At this time, it is obvious that mapping is working poorly on these selected faces, as pixels are streaking down from the top. In fact, if you open the UV editor, you'll see that currently, this wall and the whole building for that matter, are mapped from the top. This obviously isn't working, as this wall clearly needs to be mapped from the left. Notice also that if you try to move the selected faces in the UV editor, not only does it affect the mapping of the selected wall, but also the mapping of the adjacent walls as well. This is where you need to separate the various clusters that make your 3D model, without, however, breaking the geometry. With the left wall polygon selected, browse down to the Projection Rollout and click the Planar button. You can also expand the command panel if you find it easier. 3ds Max tries to find the most convenient axis to map the selection. If you want to force an axis, such as in this case the x-axis, representing a left to right projection, then you can do so. If you were to try and move the selected cluster in the UV editor at this time, you will find that you cannot. This is because the planar mapping projection tool is still active. Disable it, zoom out if you need to, and move the cluster to an empty area. Notice for one thing that the cluster is now independent and is not affecting the mapping of the adjacent walls anymore. However, you still need to adjust it as it currently encompasses the whole bitmap. Before you do, though, select all other polygons in the UV editor. These represent the rest of the model, and move them aside. You want to clear the checkered area, as this is where you will make the necessary adjustments. In the pull-down menu at the top right corner of the UV editor, choose the garage.jpg image. The diffuse bitmap associated with the applied material is now shown in the square area. Select all the polygons that make the left wall cluster one more time. You can move them, rotate them, or scale them, or you can do all three using the freeform mode. In freeform, you can move a cluster by placing the cursor inside the boundaries, or you can rotate or scale using the external grips. Use this technique to fit the cluster to the stone wall. If you need to, use F2 to toggle shaded faces off. Roughly, it's working relatively well, but still requires some tweaking. For example, the width of the cement corners does not match the bitmap yet. In addition to working in polygon mode, you can also work in vertex and edge modes. In vertex mode, select the vertices that represent the edge of the cement pillar. To constrain their motion to a horizontal or vertical axis, hold the Shift key while moving them. This looks better, but it's not enough. For the most part, the wall now looks fine, but the small recess area is streaking badly. This is because the recess is aligned with the side projection. This can be seen when you select these polygons and analyze how they appear as a straight line in the UV editor. Remember to use the F2 toggle to switch shaded faces on or off when it's convenient. Instead of applying a different projection, you will simply adjust the UV layout to spread those offending polygons onto the existing bitmap. There are various methods you can use here. One is to select vertices and relax them. However, the Relax tool could be a bit unpredictable and is usually better suited for organic models, as you will learn later. Instead, select the three polygons that make the recessed area but not the sides. In the UV editor, make sure the freeform tool is active. Holding Shift-Alt, scale the polygons down horizontally a bit. Holding Shift-Alt ensures that you are scaling the selection about a central point. Now hold Shift on its own and scale down the polygons from the top to ensure the bottom is still pinned down. Switch to vertex mode and adjust vertices accordingly. If you need to level vertices horizontally or vertically, you can use the quick transform tools. You can also select vertices and edges using ring and loop techniques, much like you do at an editable poly level. Keep on fine-tuning the position of UV vertices until you are happy with the result. Once you're done, and to free space for the next cluster, you can move the existing cluster aside. However, you do not want to lose the current UV coordinates you worked so hard to adjust. Select all the faces that make the cluster. In the bottom left corner, set the UV transforms to relative mode. With the cluster selected, drag the U value spinner until it reads 1 and watch the cluster travel to the right. The cluster moves to the right by 1 UV space and preserves the current UV coordinates. Think of it as UV tiling, which it essentially is. Deselect the cluster. You are now ready to work on the front wall. This is what you'll do in the next movie.